The morning sun rose over the town of Makara, painting the streets gold. The air was filled with the sound of children laughing and the call of sellers at the market. On that same morning, a quiet boy named Tund walked toward the local school with an old bag hanging from his shoulder. His uniform was clean but faded, and his shoes were torn at the front. Still he walked proudly, his heart full of hope. Tund was not like the other students. He did not live in a big house or ride on a motorbike to school. He stayed in a small room near the market, where the walls were made of mud and the roof leaked when it rained. Every morning he swept the floor, washed his face with cold water, and smiled at his reflection in the small mirror he owned. He never complained. What no one knew was that Tund was not just an ordinary boy, he was the son of the governor of the state. His father, Governor Adewale, was a kind but strict man. He loved his son deeply and wanted him to understand the struggles of ordinary people. "Tund," he had said one night, "you have grown up with comfort. But real wisdom comes from walking in another man's shoes. You will go to a public school, live simply and learn what life is like for others." Tund had agreed. He wanted to see the world beyond the high gates of the governor's mansion. When he arrived at Makara Secondary School, he was surprised. The school buildings were old, the walls cracked, and the paint was peeling off. Children crowded into small classrooms with broken desks. The teachers looked tired and impatient. Still, Tund smiled as he entered his new class. "Good morning, sir," he said politely to the teacher. But the teacher, Mr. Bako, only gave him a quick look and frowned. "Sit at the back," Mr. Bako said. "And don't be late again." Tund nodded and took a seat at the back of the room. The other students whispered and giggled. "Look at his shoes," one of them said. "Maybe he found them in the trash." Tund heard them, but he didn't reply. He opened his book and started writing carefully. During break time, some boys from his class surrounded him. "Hey, new boy," said one of them, a tall boy named Musa. "Where are you from? You look too poor even for this school." Tund smiled softly. "I'm from here," he said. "I just came to learn like everyone else." Musa laughed and pushed his shoulder. "We'll see how long you last." Days passed and Tund kept working hard. He came early every morning, cleaned his desk, and read under the big mango tree during lunch. Some students began to notice his quiet strength. A girl named Amina, who was kind and smart, often shared her lunch with him. "You're not like the others," she said one day. "You never get angry." Tund smiled. "My father once told me when people test you, they're teaching you patience." Even though he was treated unfairly, Tund never gave up. He helped others with homework and listened when someone had a problem. He learned that kindness did not need money, it only needed heart. One afternoon after class, Mr. Bako called him. "Tund," he said sharply, "you think you are better than everyone, don't you? Always quiet, always reading." "No, sir," Tund replied. "I just want to learn." Mr. Bako shook his head. "Then prove it. Sweep the classroom before you go home." Tund nodded without complaint. He picked up the broom and started sweeping. Other teachers walked by and laughed quietly. "These poor boys will never rise," one of them whispered. Tund heard, but he didn't stop. As he swept, he thought of his father's words again, "To lead, you must first understand." When he finished, he walked home tired but peaceful. The sun was setting behind the hills and the town glowed in orange light. At the small room he rented, he lit a candle and opened his books. Though his stomach was empty, his mind was full of dreams. He wrote in his notebook, "Today they called me poor, but one day I will show them that strength is not in money but in the heart." Weeks turned into months. Slowly, Tund began to shine. His test scores were the best in class and even the teachers started to notice. Madame Lamy, a strict but fair teacher, asked him one day, "Tund, where did you learn to speak so well?" He smiled shyly. "From my father," he said softly. He always said words have power. Though he missed his home and his family, Tund had begun to understand the value of humility. Every struggle made him stronger, every insult made him wiser. He saw how some children dropped out because their parents could not afford books. He began sharing his old notebooks with them. When someone needed help, Tund was the first to offer it. One day during a school assembly, the headmaster praised him. "We need more students like Tund," he said. "Hardworking, humble, and respectful." The students clapped. Musa, the boy who once teased him, looked down in shame. Amina smiled proudly from her place in line. As Tund stood there, the wind brushed his face and he felt something deep inside, not pride but peace. He knew he was learning the most important lesson of all, that true worth is not in what people see, but in who you are when no one is watching. That night, he wrote another line in his notebook. "One day they will know who I am." But even if they don't, I will still choose kindness. He blew out his candle and lay down to rest. The stars twinkled above Makara, and in that small, quiet room, the hidden son of the governor slept with a heart full of courage and hope. The days at Makara Secondary School were not easy for Tund. Every morning he walked through the dusty roads with his old school bag and broken shoes. He reached before everyone else and sat quietly at the back of the classroom. But no matter how hard he tried to stay invisible, some teachers seemed to enjoy making his life difficult. Mr. Bako, his mathematics teacher, was known for his temper. He liked students who came from rich homes, especially those who could bring him small gifts. When Tund got the answer right in class, Mr. Bako frowned instead of praising him. "You think you are clever, village boy?" he would say, pointing at Tund with his stick. "Let's see how long that cleverness lasts when you have to solve this next question." When Tund made a small mistake, the teacher shouted loudly so everyone could hear. The class laughed and Tund's face grew hot, but he said nothing. He just bowed his head and whispered to himself, "Patience." Madame Lamy, the English teacher, was no different. She often looked at Tund's torn shoes and sighed loudly. "Tund, why do you even come to school looking like that?" she said one morning. "You shame the whole class. You should learn from the others." The students laughed again. Amina, sitting in the front row, looked down sadly, wishing she could say something to defend him. But she knew that if she did, the teachers might turn on her too. Tund kept silent. He never argued or talked back. He only nodded respectfully and did as he was told. When others played during break, he sat under the big mango tree, reading from his worn books. He wrote down new words he learned each day, his handwriting neat and careful. That small blue notebook became his secret friend. Each night, after finishing his chores in the small room he rented, he opened that notebook and wrote about his day. He wrote about the teasing, the unfair punishments, and the laughter of others. But he also wrote about the things that gave him strength. The smile of Amina, the kindness of the old gatekeeper who shared roasted corn with him, and the beauty of the sunset over Makara Hills. He ended every page with a small promise to himself. One day they will see that worth is not found in money but in the heart. The next week the school prepared for the monthly test. Everyone was nervous, especially those who often copied answers from others. Tund studied every night under the dim light of his small candle. He worked through math problems, recited English poems, and read old history books that he borrowed from the library. He was tired, but he refused to give up. When the test came, he did his best. But even then the teachers were unfair. Mr. Bako marked his paper harshly, taking off marks for small mistakes. He praised Musa, the rich boy, even though Musa's answers were wrong. "Good work, Musa," Mr. Bako said loudly. "You'll go far one day." Then turning to Tund, he added coldly, "And you, village boy, better learn from him." Tund just smiled weakly. Deep inside, he knew his worth was not in the marks written on a paper. Still, the injustice hurt. He walked home slowly that day, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. When he passed through the market, he saw mothers selling fruits and fathers fixing bicycles. They looked tired yet strong. It reminded him of something his father had once told him. The people who struggle the most often have the greatest hearts. That night, as the rain fell softly on his roof, he opened his notebook again and wrote, "They laughed today, but I will keep learning. My time will come." A few days later, the school organized a cleaning day. Every student was supposed to help sweep the compound and wash the classroom floors. But the rich students refused. They said their hands were not meant for dirt. Mr. Bako smiled and said, "Fine. Tund, since you like hard work so much, you can do it for them." The whole class laughed. Tund looked at the dirty floor and then at the broom. He picked it up quietly and started sweeping. The dust rose in the air, sticking to his clothes. Some students whispered cruel words, but Tund stayed calm. He thought about his father and his promise to stay humble. As he cleaned, Madame Lamy walked past. She said with a smirk, "Some boys were born to serve." Her words stung, but Tund didn't stop. He finished sweeping the classroom and washed his hands carefully before sitting back down. Amina came to him later and placed a bottle of water on his desk. "Here," she said softly. "You did nothing wrong. Don't let them break your spirit." Tund looked up and smiled. "Thank you," he said. "My father once told me a seed grows best in the dirt. Maybe that's what I'm doing now, growing." From that day, Amina often sat beside him and studied with him under the mango tree. She admired his patience and strength. Slowly, a few other students began to respect him too. They realized that Tund never shouted, never boasted, and never gave up. But the teachers still found ways to make him feel small. They sent him to run errands, made him stand in the sun for being too quiet, and accused him of cheating when his test scores improved. Tund never argued. He believed that truth always found its way to the light. One afternoon, Mr. Bako caught Tund reading an old science book after class. "Where did you get this?" he asked sharply. "Did you steal it?" "No, sir," Tund said calmly. "I borrowed it from the library." Mr. Bako snatched the book and threw it on the table. "You think you're smarter than me, don't you? You'll never be anything, boy. You should be grateful we even let you sit in this class." Tund's chest tightened, but he didn't speak. He only bowed his head and whispered in his heart, "I will not hate him. I will learn from this." When he reached home that evening, he wrote another line in his notebook. "Even pain can teach if your heart stays open." The days continued like that, hard, unfair, and lonely. But Tund grew stronger. The more they tried to break him, the more determined he became. Every insult became fuel for his dreams. Every unfair punishment became another lesson in patience. He began to see the truth. Not all teachers were cruel. Some were just tired, some were bitter, and some had forgotten why they became teachers in the first place. He promised himself that if he ever got the chance, he would remind people that teaching was not about power, but about shaping hearts. And though no one knew it yet, Tund's story was just beginning. The same teachers who laughed at him would one day speak his name with respect. For the boy they mocked as poor was carrying a secret, not just of wealth or blood but of courage and purpose. The morning of the debate arrived bright and warm. The students of Makara Secondary School were busy decorating the hall with colored papers and old banners. For many of them, it was the most exciting event of the term. The topic of the debate was "Respect and Fairness Build a Better Nation." Everyone wanted to watch, including the teachers who filled the front seats with serious faces. Tund sat quietly at the side of the stage, holding a small piece of paper. His palms were sweaty and his heart beat fast, but his eyes were calm. For weeks he had prepared for this day. He had written and rewritten his speech every night under candlelight, pouring his heart into every word. When his name was called, some students whispered and laughed. "Why is he even speaking?" one said. "The poor boy will forget his lines." But Tund stood up slowly and walked to the front. His torn shoes made no sound on the wooden floor. He bowed politely before beginning. "Good morning, teachers and fellow students," he said, his voice clear and steady. "Today I speak about respect and fairness, things that cost nothing but mean everything." The hall fell quiet. Everyone expected him to stumble or sound unsure, but his voice grew stronger as he spoke. "A teacher's duty," he said, looking at Mr. Bako and Madame Lamy, "is to lift, not to crush. A good teacher builds the mind and heart, not just grades on paper." Some teachers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The students watched, amazed at the courage of the boy who dared to speak the truth. Tund continued, "When we look down on those who have little, we close our eyes to their strength. When we laugh at someone's struggle, we forget that tomorrow might test us too." His tone was calm but powerful. Respect is not for the rich or the powerful alone. It is for every human being, for the cleaner who sweeps our classrooms, for the farmer who grows our food, and for the child who comes to school with dreams instead of shoes. A soft murmur ran through the crowd. The students nodded, touched by his words. Even those who once teased him felt something stir inside their hearts. But what no one knew was that, at the back of the hall, a tall man stood quietly watching. He wore simple clothes and dark glasses, blending in with the visitors. It was Governor Adewale, Tund's father. He had come without warning, wanting to see for himself how his son was living and learning among ordinary students. As Tund spoke, the governor's eyes softened. He had sent his son to learn humility and courage, but he had not expected him to grow so strong. There was pride in his heart, but also sadness that his son had suffered to learn such lessons. Tund raised his hand slightly and continued, "Fairness is when a teacher helps a weak student instead of laughing at him. Fairness is when the same rules apply to both the rich and the poor. And fairness is when we remember that education is not a privilege, it is a right." The hall was silent now. Even Mr. Bako, who had often mocked him, sat still, his face pale. Madame Lamy looked down, twisting the ring on her finger. Tund finished his speech with a smile. "We all want a better nation," he said softly, "but it begins here, in our classrooms. If we cannot show fairness and respect here, how can we build it outside?" When he ended, there was a moment of deep silence. Then one person started clapping, Amina. Her applause was gentle but sure. Soon the whole hall joined in. The sound filled the air like rain after a long drought. The principal stood up and said, "That was the most honest speech I have heard in years." Tund bowed again, his heart pounding with relief. He walked back to his seat, and as he passed the row of teachers, he could feel their eyes on him, some filled with anger, others with guilt. After the debate, the judges announced the results. Tund had won. The students cheered loudly, chanting his name. But he didn't smile much. He looked toward the back of the hall, where the tall man in glasses stood. For a second their eyes met. The man gave a small nod before leaving quietly. That evening, Tund walked home slowly, replaying the day in his mind. He didn't know that his father had been there, but he felt a strange peace in his heart, as if someone had watched over him. When he reached his small room, he opened his blue notebook and wrote, "Today I spoke the truth. My voice trembled, but my heart stood firm. Maybe the world won't change today, but it will listen." The next morning at school, things felt different. Some students who had once mocked him now greeted him politely. Even Musa, the boy who had teased him the most, said quietly, "That was brave, Tund." During break, the principal called him to the office. "Tund," he said kindly, "you spoke from the heart yesterday. You reminded us why we are here, to build young minds, not break them. You made me proud." Tund smiled shyly. "Thank you, sir," he said. But not everyone was pleased. In the staff room, Mr. Bako muttered angrily, "That boy embarrassed us in front of everyone. Who does he think he is?" Madame Lamy sighed. "Maybe he was right," she whispered, but she didn't dare say it too loudly. Later that week, a letter arrived for the principal. It was from the governor's office. The letter said the governor wanted to visit the school soon for an inspection. The teachers panicked. The classrooms were suddenly cleaned, broken chairs fixed, and walls painted. No one knew why the visit had been planned so suddenly, except for one man, the governor himself. When the governor sat at his desk that night, he reread his notes from the day before. He had written, "My son has learned what many men never learn, that power without kindness is weakness." The teacher saw only a poor boy. "I saw a leader in the making." Meanwhile, Tund continued his normal routine. He still came early to school, helped others with homework, and shared his food with those who had none. He didn't boast about winning the debate. He acted as if nothing had changed. But deep down, something had. People had begun to see him differently. Amina often walked home with him, and one evening she said, "Tund, when you spoke yesterday, you made me think. I want to be a teacher someday, but I want to be the kind that lifts, not crushes." Tund smiled. "Then you'll be a great teacher," he said, "because you already have the right heart." The sky was golden as they reached the crossroads where they usually parted ways. The air smelled of roasted corn and evening rain. Tund waved goodbye and walked toward his small room, his notebook tucked under his arm. That night, before sleeping, he wrote one more line. "When truth is spoken kindly, even those who fear it must listen." He did not know that his words had reached beyond the school walls, that his father had already begun plans to return, not as a hidden listener, but as the governor who would soon reveal the truth about the boy they had all called poor. The next morning began like any other day in Makara. The sun rose slowly, warming the red earth. Students walked to school, their laughter filling the air. Tund carried his bag as usual, his old shoes kicking up dust. He greeted the gatekeeper politely and went straight to his classroom. He didn't know that this day would change everything. At around 9 o'clock, the sound of car engines filled the air. It was strange because Makara Secondary School rarely saw cars, especially not the kind that shone in the sunlight. The noise grew louder until several black cars stopped in front of the school gate. The security guards ran to open it. Everyone stopped what they were doing. The students whispered in surprise. From the biggest car stepped out a tall man in a dark suit, Governor Adewale, the leader of the state. His face was calm but serious. Teachers rushed out of the staff room, straightening their clothes and whispering nervously. The principal ran ahead, sweating and bowing low. "Your Excellency." "What an honor," he said quickly. "If only we had known you were coming." Governor Adewale smiled politely but said nothing at first. His eyes scanned the school compound, the broken windows, the old walls, the students standing quietly in confusion. Finally he spoke, his voice deep and clear. "No one needed to know I was coming," he said. "I came to see the truth." The teachers looked at each other, confused and afraid. The students stood in lines, waiting. Then the governor turned to the principal. "Call the student named Tund," he said. A gasp spread through the crowd. Some students looked at Tund in surprise. "Why him?" they whispered. "What did he do?" Mr. Bako frowned but obeyed. "Tund," he shouted sharply. "Come forward." Tund's heart pounded. He stepped out from the line, wondering what was happening. He had never seen his father in this way before, surrounded by guards and officials. As he walked forward, the wind blew softly, lifting the edge of his torn uniform. He stopped a few steps away from the governor and bowed respectfully. "Good morning, sir," he said softly. The governor smiled gently. "Good morning, my son." A long silence followed. The teachers and students stared in disbelief. The word son echoed in everyone's mind. The governor placed a hand on Tun's shoulder and looked at the crowd. "This young man," he said, his voice calm but firm, "is my son Tun Adewale. I sent him here months ago not as a governor's child but as an ordinary boy, to learn, to live, and to understand how my people are treated." The entire school went silent. Not even the wind moved. Mr. Bako's mouth fell open. Madame Lamy covered her face with her hands. The principal froze where he stood. A few students gasped loudly. Governor Adewale continued, "I wanted him to see the truth with his own eyes, the truth about our schools, our teachers, and the hearts of those who guide our children." He turned slightly and looked at the teachers. His eyes were calm, but there was sadness in them. "And what he found," he said slowly, "has broken my heart." The teachers bowed their heads. Mr. Bako tried to speak. "Your Excellency, we did not know." The governor raised his hand, stopping him. "You did not need to know. You only needed to care. But instead you mocked him because of his clothes. You called him lazy. You punished him unfairly. You forgot that a teacher's job is not to shame, but to shape." Some of the teachers began to cry quietly. Madame Lamy wiped her eyes. "I am sorry, sir," she whispered. The governor looked at her kindly but firmly. "Sorry is a good beginning," he said, "but it cannot change what has already been done. The question is, what will you do now that you know better?" He then turned to the students. "Many of you laughed at him too. You followed what you saw your elders do. But today you must learn a lesson that will guide you all your life. Never judge a person by what they wear or how much they have. Greatness can live in the humblest heart." Tun stood quietly beside his father, his head lowered. He felt tears in his eyes but held them back. He wasn't angry anymore. He just felt peace, peace that the truth had finally come out. The governor called him gently. "Tun, my son, tell them what you learned here." Tun looked up. His voice was soft but steady. "I learned that kindness is not weakness," he said. "I learned that respect should not depend on money. And I learned that even when people are unfair, you can still choose to stay kind." The students listened, silent and still. Even the teachers looked at him with awe. The governor nodded proudly. "Those are the lessons every leader must learn. And those are the lessons every teacher must teach." He faced the principal and said, "From today this school will change. I will make sure it has proper classrooms, books, and fair teachers. But remember, new walls will mean nothing if hearts remain the same." The principal nodded quickly, tears in his eyes. "Yes, Your Excellency. We will change. I promise." The governor smiled faintly. "Change is not a promise," he said, "it is an action." He placed his hand again on Tun's shoulder. "You have done well, my son," he said softly. "You have taught this place something that no policy or money ever could." The crowd clapped quietly at first, then louder and louder. Some students shouted his name with pride. Musa, the boy who once teased him, came forward and said, "Tun, I'm sorry. I didn't know." Tun smiled gently. "It's all right, Musa. You know now." That day the school was never the same again. The teachers spoke more kindly. The students treated one another with respect. For the first time, learning felt like hope, not fear. When the governor left the school, he looked back once more. Tun stood in the sunlight, smiling, surrounded by his classmates. The governor's heart filled with pride and peace. He knew his experiment had worked. His son had not only learned, he had taught. That night, as the stars shone over Makara, Tun sat in his small room one last time. He opened his blue notebook and wrote his final words for the day. The truth was hidden, but now it stands in the open. They saw a poor boy, but I was never poor. I carried the wealth of patience, and that is more than gold. He closed the notebook, smiled, and looked up at the sky. The moonlight touched his face softly. He whispered to himself, "Now they know who I am, but even before that, I knew who I wanted to be." The sun rose gently over Makara, lighting up the red roofs and dusty streets. The day after the governor's visit, the school felt different. The air was quiet, yet full of new energy. Teachers who once shouted now spoke softly. Students who once laughed at others now greeted each other with kindness. Something deep had changed, not just in the classrooms but in hearts. Mr. Bako came early to school that morning. He walked slowly around the compound, looking at the walls that had once echoed with his harsh words. He stopped beside the small tree where he had punished Tund many times. His eyes filled with regret. He whispered, "I was wrong." When Tund arrived, dressed neatly in the same uniform as before, Mr. Bako walked up to him. "Good morning, Tund," he said gently. "I want to say thank you. You opened my eyes." Tund smiled shyly. "Good morning, sir. I only spoke the truth." Madame Lamy also changed. She began helping students with their lessons after school. Sometimes she would say, "We must lift, not crush," repeating Tund's words from the debate. Students loved her new kindness. They no longer feared her voice. The governor kept his promise. Builders came to repair the classrooms. New desks, books, and chalkboards were brought in. But even more important than the new furniture was the new spirit inside the school. Teachers now listened to their students. They encouraged them to dream and speak freely. Tund continued to study hard. He was not treated like a special boy anymore, but like every other student. Yet, everyone respected him deeply, not because he was the governor's son, but because he had shown courage and humility. During break times, students gathered around him to listen to his stories. He never bragged about who he was. Instead, he talked about fairness and kindness. "It doesn't matter how small you are," he often said. "What matters is the size of your heart." Years passed and Tund grew into a young man. He left Makara to attend the best school in the city, but he never forgot his roots. Every holiday he returned to visit Makara Secondary School. The children would run after him shouting, "Tund! Tund!" He always stopped to greet them, shaking every hand and smiling at everyone. One afternoon, while visiting his old classroom, he found his blue notebook still lying in the drawer of his old desk. The pages were yellow now, but his handwriting was still clear. He sat by the window and read his old words, "I will show them that worth is not found in money but in character." He smiled softly. "I did," he whispered. Tund decided to start a scholarship program for poor children in Makara. He named it the Kind Heart Fund. His goal was simple: to give others the chance to learn without fear or shame. When he visited the village to announce it, the whole community gathered under the big tree in front of the school. Governor Adewale was older now with gray hair, but he stood proudly beside his son. "My people," he said, "years ago, a boy taught us that power without kindness is empty. That boy is now a man and he still believes in fairness. Today Makara begins a new chapter." The crowd cheered. Tears filled the eyes of many who remembered how things once were. Mr. Bako, now retired, stood quietly in the back, smiling. "That boy changed us all," he said to a friend. Tund stepped forward to speak. He looked around and saw faces, young, old, rich, poor, all waiting for his words. His voice was calm and full of warmth. "I was once a student here," he said. "I was called lazy, poor, and useless. But I learned that names do not shape you, your heart does. You can be great no matter where you come from. True greatness is not in power but in kindness." The people clapped loudly. Some shouted his name, others wiped their eyes. That night, the stars shone brightly over Makara. Children sat around their parents, listening to the story of the boy who taught his teachers. It became a story told again and again, about courage, truth, and respect. As the years went on, Makara grew into one of the best schools in the region. The students studied hard and many became teachers, nurses, and leaders. But no matter where they went, they carried one lesson in their hearts: the lesson Tund had given them. Even long after Tund became a respected man, a lawyer and a voice for justice, he always remembered that small school in the dusty town. Whenever he spoke at big gatherings, he often said the same words with the same gentle smile: "Kindness is stronger than power, and respect is the first step to change." People listened to him and felt inspired. His story spread far beyond Makara, across villages and cities, teaching everyone that no act of goodness is ever too small. Back in Makara, on a quiet morning, an old teacher placed flowers near a wooden sign that stood at the school gate. The sign read, "Makara Secondary School, where kindness became greatness." And beneath it, in smaller letters, were the words Tund had once written in his notebook: "True greatness is not in power but in kindness." The people of Makara never forgot him. The boy who came as a student, taught as a teacher, and left as a legend.